There is a particular kind of tired that settles into bones too young to carry it. You see it sometimes in the eyes of children who smile too knowingly, who comfort their parents instead of seeking comfort, who learn to read the room before they learn to read books. They are called mature, responsible, wise beyond their years. And everyone means it as a compliment. You were that child. While other kids threw tantrums over broken crayons, you were calculating how to keep your parents from arguing tonight. While your classmates complained about homework, you were budgeting the grocery money, counting coins on the kitchen table, trying to make the week stretch further than the money would allow. Your childhood memories are not painted in primary colors and laughter. They are tinted with a low hum of worry, a constant surveillance of adult moods, a readiness to intervene. You do not remember what it felt like to be careless, to trust that someone else would handle things, to believe that the world would continue spinning without your constant vigilance. Now, as an adult, you are the person everyone calls during a crisis. You are steady, capable, the one who never falls apart. People admire your composure, your ability to think clearly when everything around you is burning. They do not see the terror underneath, the belief, irrational and unshakable, that if you stop controlling everything, the entire world will collapse. That if you rest for even a moment, disaster will slip through the cracks you failed to watch. You cannot delegate. You cannot relax. You cannot shake the feeling that you are the only adult in a room full of children, even when everyone around you is perfectly capable, even when you are exhausted, even when your body is begging you to stop. This is not strength. This is not a gift. This is a scar. The truth that no one told you is this: your early maturity was not evidence of your exceptional character. It was a survival response to the absence of real adults. You were a child forced to wear a giant's coat, and your small shoulders have been aching under its weight ever since. You learned to parent yourself, and then to parent your parents because someone had to keep the family from sinking. But no one ever asked if you wanted that job. No one ever wondered what it cost you. This script is about that cost, about the invisible theft of childhood, about the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being responsible before you were ready, about the adult you became, hyper-competent, chronically overwhelmed, unable to trust anyone else to carry what you have always carried alone. And it is also about something else, about the possibility, however distant it seems right now, of finally setting down the weight, of resigning from a position you never asked for, of allowing yourself, at long last, to be young. Let us be direct about what happened. Your childhood was stolen, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, incrementally, in 1,000 small moments when you had to be older than you were, when you had to think like an adult while your brain was still learning how to imagine, how to play, how to dream without purpose. There is a natural order to family. Children are meant to explore, to make mistakes, to test boundaries knowing someone will catch them. Parents are meant to provide the boundary, to absorb the chaos, to be the steady ground beneath uncertain feet. In your family, this order reversed itself. You became the boundary. You absorbed the chaos. You were the ground that held everyone else up, even as your own foundation was still forming, still soft, still vulnerable to every impression pressed into it. You were not raising yourself. You were raising them. And here is the complicated part, the part that makes you feel guilty even thinking it. Sometimes you feel contempt for your parents, even though you love them, perhaps especially because you love them. You see their weakness, their inability to handle what adults should handle. You see them as children themselves, reckless and needy, unable to carry their own weight. And then immediately you feel terrible for thinking this way. You tell yourself you are ungrateful, cruel, that you should be more compassionate. But listen carefully. That contempt is not evidence of your moral failure. It is the natural consequence of reversed roles. Respect requires safety. Trust requires reliability. How can a child fully respect the parent they have to rescue? How can they look up to someone they constantly have to prop up? The foundation of healthy parent-child relationships is the child's ability to depend on the parent. When that dependency flows backward, when the parent depends on the child, something essential breaks. Not just trust, but the very structure that allows respect to exist. You learn to see your parents as fragile, as people who needed your protection, your wisdom, your emotional labor. You learn this because it was true, because they were fragile, because they did need you in ways that were not appropriate, not fair, not sustainable for a developing nervous system trying to figure out its own shape. So when you feel that flicker of disdain, that exhausted frustration at their continued inability to function as adults, do not punish yourself for it. It is the reasonable response of a psyche that was forced to become strong because the people who should have been strong were not. It is the grief of a child who needed parents and got dependents instead, who needed to be held and had to do the holding. Your resentment is not a character flaw. It is a message from the part of you that knows this was never supposed to be your job, that knows you deserve different, that is still angry after all these years, that no one intervened, that no one noticed a child should not carry adult burdens, that everyone praised your maturity instead of questioning why it was necessary. The little girl who calculated grocery budgets deserved to play with dolls. The little boy who mediated his parents' arguments deserved to build blanket forts. You deserve to be irresponsible, to be careless, to make mistakes that did not have catastrophic consequences. You deserve to have your emotional needs matter more than your parents' emotional needs. You deserve to be the child. You were robbed of that. And before we talk about healing, before we talk about moving forward, you need to hear this. It was not your fault. The theft happened. You did not imagine it. You did not exaggerate it. It was real. It was wrong, and you have permission to be angry about it. There are specific types of families that create children who must become adults too soon. Understanding them is not about assigning blame. It is about seeing the mechanism clearly, understanding how a child's nervous system adapts to an environment that demands the impossible, how survival rewires identity, how coping mechanisms become personality traits that last decades beyond their usefulness. The first type is the family with emotionally immature parents. These are not cruel people. Often they are loving, affectionate, even well-intentioned, but emotionally, they never fully grew up. They sulk when they do not get their way. They make impulsive decisions without considering consequences. They need constant reassurance. They become overwhelmed by responsibilities that should be manageable. They are, in essence, children themselves, wearing adult bodies and adult obligations without the emotional infrastructure to support either. Nature abhors a vacuum. When the position of captain is left empty, someone must steer the ship. In these families, the child looks around, sees no one at the helm, and climbs into the captain's chair themselves. Not because they want to, not because they are suited for it, but because the alternative is watching everything sink. The child becomes the planner, the decision maker, the one who thinks ahead because no one else is thinking ahead. They develop what psychologists call compulsive caregiving, an inability to witness need without trying to fill it. A nervous system that cannot rest because rest means someone might go unhelped. Some crisis might go unmanaged. You learn to read your mother's face before she entered a room, to assess your father's mood by the sound of his footsteps. You learn to manage their emotions because their emotions were volatile, unpredictable, and your safety depended on keeping them stable. You became a tiny therapist, a small diplomat, negotiating peace in a household that should have been your refuge, not your responsibility. Then there is the phenomenon psychologists call emotional incest. Though the term makes people uncomfortable, it should make people uncomfortable. It names something deeply wrong. This is not about physical boundaries being violated. It is about emotional boundaries dissolving, about a parent treating their child as a confidant, a therapist, a substitute spouse, the mother who tells her teenage son about her sexual dissatisfaction with his father, the father who leans on his daughter as his primary emotional support, confiding his loneliness, his fears, his resentments about the mother. The parent who says, "You are the only one who understands me. You are more mature than your other parent. We are on the same team." It feels like closeness, like being special, like a privilege, but it is a burden dressed up as intimacy. Because when a parent confides adult problems to a child, they are not connecting. They are downloading their emotional waste into a smaller, less equipped system. They are asking the child to carry weight the child's psyche cannot metabolize. The child learns that love means absorbing another person's pain. That intimacy means sacrificing your own needs to meet someone else's emotional hunger. That being valued means being useful. The generational boundary disappears. You stop being the child and become a peer, an equal, a partner in your parents' emotional life. And here is the cruelest part. You feel special because of it. You feel chosen, trusted, more important than your siblings who are not burdened this way. You do not realize until much later that you were not chosen for a gift. You were chosen for a theft. Your childhood was the price of that closeness. In families with addiction, mental illness, or chronic crisis, the child becomes the crisis manager, the one who hides the bottles, the one who cleans up after the breakdown, the one who lies to teachers, to neighbors, to anyone who might notice that things at home are not okay. You learn to anticipate disaster, to scan for warning signs, to construct elaborate prevention systems in your mind, mapping out every possible catastrophe and your response to it. Your brain develops executive function prematurely. Planning, risk assessment, resource management. Skills that usually develop in the prefrontal cortex during adolescence are forced online years too early because survival demands it. But this early activation comes at a cost. The parts of your brain that should be developing during childhood, the parts responsible for play, for creativity, for rest, for social connection, for joy without purpose, those parts remain underdeveloped. You become exceptionally good at managing chaos and exceptionally bad at experiencing peace. You feel most alive during crisis, because crisis is when your hyper-developed management skills are needed. Calm feels foreign, dangerous even, like the eye of a storm, a temporary reprieve before the next disaster. You develop what therapists call a savior complex, the belief that if you just try hard enough, plan well enough, sacrifice enough of yourself, you can fix your family. You can make your mother happy. You can keep your father sober. You can hold the marriage together through sheer force of will and careful emotional labor. You assign yourself a mission that is, from the beginning, impossible, because you are a child, because these are adult problems, because no amount of effort from a 10-year-old can solve a 30-year-old's unprocessed trauma. But you do not know this yet, so you keep trying. You become the family hero, the responsible one, the one everyone can count on. And you carry this pattern into adulthood. You are drawn to romantic partners who are struggling, who need saving, who remind you unconsciously of the parent you could never quite fix. You choose friends who lean on you heavily, but rarely ask how you are doing. You build a life where you are always needed, always useful, always indispensable, because being needed is the only form of love you learn to recognize. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from this. Not the clean tiredness of physical exertion, but a bone-deep depletion, a fatigue that sleep does not touch, because you are not just managing your own life, you are managing everyone's life. Your nervous system is scanning constantly, monitoring, adjusting, intervening. Even when you are alone, even when you are supposedly resting, part of you is still on duty, still waiting for the next crisis, still holding the weight of everyone's well-being on shoulders that were never meant to carry it. And here is what no one tells you. The weight does not get lighter with practice. You just get stronger. You build more capacity to carry it. Your tolerance for strain increases, so you take on more and more and more until you are so far beyond your actual limits that you do not remember what having limits even feels like. You forget that no is a complete sentence. You forget that other people can solve their own problems. You forget that the world does not actually need you to hold it together every single moment. It feels like closeness, like being special, like a privilege, but it is a burden dressed up as intimacy. Because when a parent confides adult problems to a child, they are not connecting. They are downloading their emotional waste into a smaller, less equipped system. They are asking the child to carry weight the child's psyche cannot metabolize. The child learns that love means absorbing another person's pain. That intimacy means sacrificing your own needs to meet someone else's emotional hunger. That being valued means being useful. The generational boundary disappears. You stop being the child and become a peer, an equal, a partner in your parents' emotional life. And here is the cruelest part. You feel special because of it. You feel chosen, trusted, more important than your siblings who are not burdened this way. You do not realize until much later that you were not chosen for a gift. You were chosen for a theft. Your childhood was the price of that closeness. In families with addiction, mental illness, or chronic crisis, the child becomes the crisis manager, the one who hides the bottles, the one who cleans up after the breakdown, the one who lies to teachers, to neighbors, to anyone who might notice that things at home are not okay. You learn to anticipate disaster, to scan for warning signs, to construct elaborate prevention systems in your mind, mapping out every possible catastrophe and your response to it. Your brain develops executive function prematurely. Planning, risk assessment, resource management. Skills that usually develop in the prefrontal cortex during adolescence are forced online years too early because survival demands it. But this early activation comes at a cost. The parts of your brain that should be developing during childhood, the parts responsible for play, for creativity, for rest, for social connection, for joy without purpose, those parts remain underdeveloped. You become exceptionally good at managing chaos and exceptionally bad at experiencing peace. You feel most alive during crisis, because crisis is when your hyper-developed management skills are needed. Calm feels foreign, dangerous even, like the eye of a storm, a temporary reprieve before the next disaster. You develop what therapists call a savior complex, the belief that if you just try hard enough, plan well enough, sacrifice enough of yourself, you can fix your family. You can make your mother happy. You can keep your father sober. You can hold the marriage together through sheer force of will and careful emotional labor. You assign yourself a mission that is, from the beginning, impossible, because you are a child, because these are adult problems, because no amount of effort from a 10-year-old can solve a 30-year-old's unprocessed trauma. But you do not know this yet, so you keep trying. You become the family hero, the responsible one, the one everyone can count on. And you carry this pattern into adulthood. You are drawn to romantic partners who are struggling, who need saving, who remind you unconsciously of the parent you could never quite fix. You choose friends who lean on you heavily, but rarely ask how you are doing. You build a life where you are always needed, always useful, always indispensable, because being needed is the only form of love you learn to recognize. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from this. Not the clean tiredness of physical exertion, but a bone-deep depletion, a fatigue that sleep does not touch, because you are not just managing your own life, you are managing everyone's life. Your nervous system is scanning constantly, monitoring, adjusting, intervening. Even when you are alone, even when you are supposedly resting, part of you is still on duty, still waiting for the next crisis, still holding the weight of everyone's well-being on shoulders that were never meant to carry it. And here is what no one tells you. The weight does not get lighter with practice. You just get stronger. You build more capacity to carry it. Your tolerance for strain increases, so you take on more and more and more until you are so far beyond your actual limits that you do not remember what having limits even feels like. You forget that no is a complete sentence. You forget that other people can solve their own problems. You forget that the world does not actually need you to hold it together every single moment. You become the person who works through illness, who skips meals because someone else needed your lunch break, who cancels therapy appointments to help a friend move, who says yes when you mean no because disappointing someone feels like a moral failure. Your body starts sending distress signals, migraines, insomnia, digestive issues, chronic pain, but you interpret these as weaknesses to push through, rather than messages to slow down. Because slowing down was never safe. Because in your family of origin, your vigilance was the only thing standing between stability and collapse. What you do not see yet is that you are still living in that childhood home, still operating from that outdated survival manual, still believing that if you stop controlling everything, disaster will strike. But the disaster already happened. It happened years ago, in a house where children had to be parents, and you survived it. You do not need those defenses anymore, but your nervous system does not know that yet. It is still braced for impact, still prepared for the next emergency, still convinced that your hypervigilance is the only thing keeping catastrophe at bay. Before we go further, before we talk about letting go and healing and all the things that probably feel impossible right now, you need to hear this. What you developed was not weakness. The skills you built, the capacity you have, the strength that let you survive when you should have been protected, These things are real. They are valuable. The world genuinely needs people who can lead under pressure, who can think clearly in chaos, who can be the steady presence when everything else is falling apart. You are that person. You have a kind of resilience most people never develop. You can hold multiple crises in your mind simultaneously and triage them efficiently. You can make difficult decisions quickly. You can absorb other people's panic without becoming panicked yourself. These are leadership qualities. They make you exceptional at your work. They make you the friend people call at 3 in the morning. They make you capable of things others simply cannot do. But here is the edge where strength becomes prison. You cannot turn it off. The same hypervigilance that makes you an excellent leader also makes it impossible for you to be led. The same responsibility that makes you reliable also makes it impossible for you to trust anyone else's reliability. The same control that kept you safe as a child now keeps you isolated as an adult, because control and connection cannot fully coexist. To connect with someone, you must be willing to be affected by them, to be changed by them, to admit you do not have all the answers, and your nervous system registers that vulnerability as mortal danger. So you stay in charge, you stay capable, you stay alone at the top of the mountain you climbed to escape drowning, not realizing that the mountain itself has become a new kind of trap, that the view from up here, while impressive, is also cold. That being the strongest person in every room means never getting to rest in anyone's strength but your own. Your need for control is not a personality flaw. It is not evidence that you are difficult or rigid or untrusting by nature. It is a medication you learn to self-prescribe. In your childhood, chaos meant danger, unpredictability meant pain. Loss of control meant watching people you loved fall apart and being powerless to stop it. So you learned to grip tightly, to manage every variable, to leave nothing to chance. Control became the way you kept terror at bay. And it worked. That is the complicated part. It actually worked. Your hypervigilance kept you safe in an unsafe environment. Your premature maturity got you through circumstances that could have destroyed you. Your compulsive caregiving probably saved your family from worse outcomes. These strategies were adaptive. They were brilliant, in fact, in the way all survival strategies are brilliant. Your psyche did exactly what it needed to do, with the resources available to a child, with no other options. But adaptive strategies outlive their usefulness. What saves you in one context can suffocate you in another. The tight grip that steadied you through childhood now strangles your relationships. The vigilance that protected you then now exhausts you in an environment that is no longer actively dangerous. The belief that you must do everything yourself, which was accurate when you were 10, is no longer accurate now. But your body has not received that update. Your nervous system is still running outdated software, still responding to threats that no longer exist, still braced for an emergency that already ended. So, when we talk about healing, we are not talking about becoming weak. We are not asking you to stop being capable. We are talking about updating the system, teaching your body that it is safe to unclench, that other people can be trusted with responsibility, that you are allowed to be incompetent sometimes, to not have the answer, to let someone else take the lead while you rest in the passenger seat and watch the landscape go by. This is not about erasing your strength. It is about giving yourself permission to be strong in new ways, the strength to say no, the strength to disappoint someone, the strength to admit you are tired, the strength to be helped instead of always being the helper, the strength to be small and uncertain and human instead of constantly performing invincibility. You have been the adult for so long. You held everything together with such fierce determination. You survived what should have broken you. And that took extraordinary power. But power should not be a cage. Capability should not be a life sentence. You deserve to experience what happens when you slowly, carefully, terrifyingly begin to release your grip on the wheel and trust that the car will not immediately crash, that the people around you might actually be able to drive, that the world can hold itself together without your constant intervention. Healing from this particular wound is not about processing memories or understanding your past better. You already understand. You have probably understood for years. The work is not cognitive, it is behavioral. It is nervous system retraining. It is the slow, uncomfortable practice of doing things differently until your body finally believes that different is safe. The first step sounds simple, but feels like betrayal. You must resign. Not from your actual job, not from your relationships, but from the invisible position you have held since childhood. The role of family manager, emotional regulator, crisis prevention specialist. The job you never applied for, never wanted, but have been performing with such dedication that everyone, including you, forgot it was never supposed to be yours. This resignation happens in small acts of refusal. When your mother calls with another crisis, another problem she wants you to solve, you say something revolutionary. That sounds really hard. What do you think you are going to do about it? You do not offer solutions. You do not take over. You reflect the problem back to the person whose problem it actually is. And then you sit with the discomfort of not rescuing. The guilt, the anxiety, the fear that if you do not step in, something terrible will happen. You let those feelings move through you without acting on them. You discover, slowly and painfully, that people can survive without your intervention, that they can solve their own problems or fail to solve them. And either way, it is not your responsibility to prevent their consequences. This will feel like abandonment, like cruelty, like you are violating some fundamental law of love. Your nervous system will scream at you that you are doing something wrong, because for your entire life, love has meant sacrifice. Care has meant taking over. Connection has meant absorbing other people's pain so they do not have to feel it. To stop doing these things feels like stopping love itself, but it is not. It is starting a different kind of love, one with boundaries, one where you care about someone without carrying them, one where you can witness struggle without having to fix it. The second step is even stranger. You must learn to play, not exercise, which is productive, not hobbies that produce something useful, but genuine, purposeless play. The kind of activity that has no goal, no outcome, no metric of success. Just the experience of doing something for the pure sensation of doing it. This will feel wasteful, stupid, like time you should be spending on the endless list of productive tasks that always needs doing. That resistance is the point. Your inability to play without guilt is evidence of how thoroughly your childhood was colonized by adult responsibility. Start small. Spend 30 minutes doing something absurd. Color in a coloring book. Build something with blocks and then knock it over. Dance badly to music you loved as a teenager. Blow bubbles. The specific activity matters less than the practice of engaging in something with no utility whatsoever. You are trying to wake up the part of your brain that knows how to be delighted, the part that was put to sleep when you became too responsible to waste time on joy. This is not frivolous. This is neurological rehabilitation. You are teaching your system that not everything has to be serious, that life can include lightness, that you are allowed to be silly and unproductive and useless for brief stretches of time without the world collapsing. The third step requires even more courage. You must practice what therapists call healthy helplessness, the deliberate choice to not help even when you could, even when you see exactly what needs to be done and know you could do it better, faster, more efficiently than whoever is struggling with it. You must let them struggle, let them fail, let them learn at their own pace instead of swooping in to prevent their discomfort. This is how you break the addiction to being needed, because that is what it is, an addiction. You get a hit of purpose, of value, of mattering every time someone needs you and you deliver. That hit has been your primary source of self-worth for so long that the thought of not being needed feels like the thought of not existing. But you do exist, even when you are not useful, even when you are not solving problems, even when you are just sitting quietly, doing nothing, helping no one. Your worth is not contingent on your productivity. Your value is not measured by how many people you rescue. You matter because you are alive, not because you are functional. This is the hardest truth to internalize when your entire identity was built on being the capable one. So, you practice. When your friend is stressed about a project, you do not offer to help. You say, "That sounds stressful. I believe you will figure it out." When your partner cannot find something, you do not immediately get up to find it for them. You stay seated. You let them search. You tolerate the discomfort of watching someone struggle with something you could easily solve. You learn, gradually and against every instinct, that other people are more capable than you have been treating them. That your constant intervention was not just exhausting you, it was also preventing them from developing their own competence. That by always being the strong one, You were inadvertently keeping everyone around you weak. The fourth step might be the most terrifying. You must allow yourself to be cared for, not in the performative way where you accept help, but manage how it is given, directing and controlling even your own rescue, but genuinely letting someone else take over, letting them see you at your worst, letting them make decisions about what you need, letting them be wrong about what helps you, and not correcting them immediately, letting them fumble through caring for you, the way you have been fumbling through caring for yourself. When you are sick, you ask someone to bring you soup. You do not specify which kind. You do not send them the recipe. You do not give detailed instructions. You just ask, and then you receive whatever they bring, and you say thank you. When you are sad, you call someone, and you cry. You do not apologize. You do not explain. You do not wrap up your pain in neat packaging to make it easier for them to handle. You just let yourself be a mess in their presence and trust that they can hold it, that they will not collapse, that your vulnerability will not destroy them the way you have always feared it would. This is not weakness. This is the opposite of weakness. It takes more strength to lower your defenses than to keep them raised, more courage to be soft than to stay armored, more trust to fall than to keep catching everyone else. There is a story from Greek mythology about Atlas, the Titan condemned to hold the sky on his shoulders for eternity. He stands at the edge of the world, alone, bearing weight that would crush anyone else. He cannot rest. He cannot kneel. He cannot even shift his stance without risking the collapse of everything above him. He is strong enough to carry the heavens, but that strength is his prison. You have been Atlas. You have carried weight that was never meant to be yours. You held your family together when you were still learning to hold yourself upright. You kept the sky from falling when you were small enough to fit under furniture, young enough to still believe in monsters under the bed. Except, the monsters were not under the bed. They were in the living room, in the kitchen, in the silences between your parents, in the chaos you learned to manage before you learned multiplication tables. But here is what the myth does not tell you. Atlas's punishment had a duration. It was not truly eternal, even though it felt that way. And your punishment is over. The sentence has been served. You are allowed now to do something that will feel impossible, that will feel like the end of the world. You are allowed to set the sky down. Lower your shoulders slowly. Bend your knees, let the weight slide off your back and come to rest on the ground where it belongs. And then watch, breathless and terrified, as nothing collapses. The sky does not fall. The stars continue turning. The earth keeps spinning. Everything you thought depended on your constant vigilance continues without it. The world is stronger than you believed. Your family is more capable than you gave them credit for. And you, finally unburdened, discover that you can stand upright, that your spine was not meant to curve under cosmic weight, that your hands were not made to grip so tightly. You were a child who had to be an adult before you were ready. You did what you had to do. You survived what should have broken you. You kept everyone safe, including the people whose job it was to keep you safe. You did it brilliantly, exhaustingly, at tremendous cost to yourself. But you do not have to do it anymore. Somewhere inside you, beneath all the responsibility and competence and hypervigilance, there is still a child, still waiting, still hoping that someday someone will say, "You can stop now. You can rest. You can run outside and get your clothes dirty and laugh without purpose and make mistakes that do not carry devastating consequences. You can be young even though you are no longer young. You can be irresponsible for an afternoon. You can be foolish. You can be held instead of holding. That child is still there. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that makes this whole painful journey worthwhile, is this. You are finally old enough, strong enough, and wise enough to be the parent the child needed, not your actual parents who may never be capable of giving you what they could not give then. But you can turn toward that small, tired version of yourself and say, "I see you. I see how hard you tried. I see how much you carried, and I am here now. You do not have to be the adult anymore. I will be the adult. You can finally be the child. So let yourself be small for a moment. Let yourself need. Let yourself be imperfect and uncertain and gloriously messily human. Let someone else hold the sky while you remember what it feels like to look up at the stars without feeling responsible for keeping them in place. You have been strong for so long. Now it is time to discover what it feels like to be free.